Hello fellow Unreal Engine artists, designers and developers, and welcome to another installment of this landscape material series. Today we're going to look at using terrain tools such as Gaea and using the information that they output, such as height masks and more specifically the different types of data masks like flow, angle, etc., and how they can be integrated into your material in Unreal Engine. So let's get into it. Today we're going to look at using terrain creation tools like Gaea to create your height maps and other maps that you can use, textural maps like flow maps, angle maps and others, in order to import and use them in your auto material. So you can see in this example I've created a mountain which I've used to set up a new level. I've even used thing called alpha masks in order to paint smaller versions of those mountains around, and then I've imported texture maps such as this flow map to create a different texture where the water would flow down the landscape. So you can see we've got this sort of groove in the landscape with a different texture. I've also set up an angle map so that grass is only showing on the west side of the mountain. So I've imported that also from the terrain creation tool and plugged it in to the auto landscape so that the grass appears in that area, and also the foliage from PCG is only spawned in that area as well. So that's what we're doing today. Let's hop into Gaea and get started. So I'm starting in Gaea today, but that's not the important part of the tutorial. This is more about generically how to export height masks and texture masks from your terrain creation tool and then use them in the auto material. So I'm just using Gaea as an example, but if you want to follow on, I've got the link for Gaea in the description below. You can download the community edition. You don't need a license for that, and it just restricts the output to 1K. If you want to go further with Gaea, you can purchase a license and then you can output higher resolutions. So you can see here I've opened it up and I've got a blank canvas. And I'll start off by just creating a mountainous terrain, and that will show some of the features that I want to discuss today. So I'm just going to right click in the graph, do mountain, and then in the settings over on the right hand side I will put the height all the way up to 2, or actually let's do it all the way up to 3. Let's do eroded and high, and if I zoom in a bit here, you can see that I've got a mountain, but it's quite bulbous at the moment. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to use the shaper tool at the bottom here, and then I will change that to, just right click here and I'll change that to -0.3, and you can see what it's done is it's pulled the edges together a bit, so created more of a ridge there. And you can see by selecting that eroded one here that I've got, again let's move around here a bit so you can see what's going on. You can see that I've got the sort of erosion lines here as well. So what I'll do is I'll create a flow map as well, which we can add onto our texture at the end. So there's our first part of it, an eroded mountain. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a flow map. So this is something we can add to our texture. So drag out from here and do flow map, and you can see here that it has all of the mask elements where water would drip down through those eroded elements, and we can then use that with our paint layer to paint these flow areas onto the map. So in terms of the values here, I'm going to go with 0.7 for the flow length to create sort of wide areas up here. Flow volume, let's reduce that to 0.18. Again, this doesn't really matter, it's just for an example. Okay, and let's stick with that for the flow. So something else we could do is we could create an angular mask as well. So say we only wanted grass to grow on the west side of the mountain, we could create a mask and then apply that as well. So dragging out from the mountain, let's do angle, And you can see that what we've got here is it's using this angle here, this azimuth, to specify the angle. So let's keep it right on 0, so it's mainly coming in from the left-hand side or the west. And then what we can do is we can restrict the range at the top level just so the mask is more restrictive. So if you reduce that down to about 0.2, you can see that we've got nothing on the east side and all of the grass on the slopes of the west side. And you can play around with the fall off as well if you want, but that'll do for me. So now what I've got here is I've got a height mask for the mountain to build our landscape, and then I've got 2 general texture masks for the flow and the angle that I can use. So I'm going to use the flow to paint on a paint layer to paint a different texture where the flow is, and the angle I'm going to use as a mask within the material to mask the grass, for example. So what we need to do now is we need to export that, and in this version of Gaea there's an Unreal export plugin. So if we drag out from Mountain and do Unreal, you can see that we've got this export here. So you can add more outputs to this. So if you not right click on it, if you click on it and then choose add input here, we can add 2 more inputs, and we can plug in our flow and our angle here. And you can see that it's because this is has knowledge of Unreal, it does automatic sizing. This is the community edition, so I'm restricted to this 1K size. It's PNG is pretty standard, so leave it as that. And then I've checked on this friendly naming, so it'll prefix the outputs with H and T for the textures for the flow and angle. Now there is a plugin as well to directly bridge to Unreal, but as I'm really just doing a generic output here to show how you use those masks in the auto material, I'll just export them, and then we'll see how we use them in Unreal in a second. First thing we ought to do is really save this project. So we've actually got a folder for it. So do File, Save, and I'm going to call it Mountain. And then we will click on the Build tab down at the bottom here and just click on Build, and it will say, do you want to start the build? Do you want to open the folder after the build finishes? So let's do that so we see what we've got at the end, and click on Start Build. And it will take a second or two, it's pretty quick. So what we've got now is we've got, ignore those JSON files, that was really if we used the plugin to export it directly. We've got this height map for the mountain. We've got the texture maps for the angle and the flow. And let's now hop into Unreal with our project and use that. Okay, so I've opened up Unreal Engine, and what we'll do is we'll create a new level for this mountain. So do File, New Level, choose the basic level and create. And we'll get rid of the floor and the player start. So we've got a nice blank canvas, and what I'll do first of all is show you how you can use the height information that we've just created. There are a couple of ways we can use it. So go into your landscape mode, and we're going to create a new landscape, and we can import from file. So click on the Import from File button here, and then choose the height map file. So go down into your document Gaea projects, and within builds, mountain, you'll see there's our 3 outputs. We want the height one, the mountain output. So double click on that to open it, and everything else should default to what you want. We might need to change the scale afterwards, but let's see what it looks like. Do import. And now if we just zoom out a little bit, up a little bit, you'll see it's a very tall mountain. I think by default it does this as what's called normalized, so it's stretching the whole range from the bottom of the possible Unreal range of values all the way to the top. So let's choose our landscape and let's change the scale. So let's make that 30, but before we do that, we only want to do it on the Z-axis. So click on the lock so that we don't change it on all axes, and just change 30 on the Z-axis. And now you can see what we've done is we've flattened that considerably. So we can still see these little areas where the erosion is, but that probably makes more sense when you go into play mode. Let's do that, just see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now the other way, I said there was more than one way we could use the height map. We can also use the height maps to sculpt our features onto the landscape as well. So if you go into the sculpt mode here and choose a brush type of alpha brushes, we can then use a texture such as this mountain to actually draw mountains onto the landscape. So we'll need to import that in first. So let's go into our materials textures and we'll do import and go into that same build for Gaea and choose that H mountain out texture. And this time, with that selected, we can then plug it into the texture of this alpha brush. So you can see now this mountain is available to draw directly onto the landscape. And then in terms of the texture channel, it doesn't really matter because this is black and white. You can use any, but the default of red is as good as any. Brush size is very small at the moment. You can see as I'm going around the textures that there's not the big yellow one, but the one inside it, the little white square is what we're going to draw. So let's move that all the way up to say 16,000. And now you can see that it's taking up quite a bit of the space. And it's sort of rotating as we move around because we've got this auto rotate on there. So in order to use it, keep the tool strength low. So let's make the tool strength 0.1 because a little goes a long way here. And then what you can do is you can go over to one corner of the landscape and just press and hold your left mouse button. And you can see that it starts to lift it up in the shape of that mountain. And then we could go over here and maybe do a slightly bigger one. And then maybe over to the other side and do one sort of halfway up. So you can see it's a nice way of sculpting your landscape, but in a believable way with terrain features. So you could use Gaea or other tools like that to create alpha brushes with different features and then actually design your landscapes interactively. So we've talked about the two ways you can use height maps here. It's probably worth doing a save at this point in time of this level. So let's do a save and let's call this one mountain. All right, so the next thing we want to do is set up an instance of our auto material for this landscape. So go into the content browser, go to materials folder, and what we'll do is we'll copy the Glacier Valley instance and we'll then modify some of the parameters. So I'm going to do a duplicate on that with Control D and I'm going to call it MI mountain. And with it selected, I'm going to go to the landscape and assign that to the landscape material. And we'll see in an invisible viewport now. And if you remember, you have to assign the paint layers because we've got 3 layers in this material. So to do that, go back into your landscape mode, go to the paint layers, and we'll need to assign the auto material, the path, and the road. So click on the plus and create weight blended layers for all 3. So I'm doing a plus and weight blended layer for each of these 3 layers here. Last one is the road. And now we can come out of landscape mode, do a Control-Shift-S to save everything. And you can see we've got a terrain with a lot of soil and rock at the bottom, a tiny little bit of grass and some dotted snow. So let's change some of those parameters to suit this value a bit better. And let's change the height fog slightly here as well. So let's go to the height fog and let's reduce the fog height fall off to 0.4. That'll probably do at the moment, just so we can see a bit more of the terrain. Okay, so now open up go to the materials and open up this new MI mountain instance. And now let's go through some of these values. So for the ground slope constraint, I'm going to make that 20. For the mid-low, I'm going to make that 10. In fact, I'm going to go down and turn the snow off for this layer. And then for the mid-high, I'm also going to make that 10. So what we've got is quite a rocky texture now. So it's mainly rock at the bottom, very tiny bit of grass and soil, and then the cliff face. And then with your cliffs, you can choose whether you want to use triplanar or not. It's not particularly steep slopes there, so you might want to switch the triplanar off. Just have the regular textures for the cliffs. That probably looks a bit better. Okay, so now we've got our sort of first pass of the material. I now want to use those flow maps we create in Gaea in order to paint some extra textures on here. So to do that, we need to import them. So go into your content browser, go to within the materials folder, go into the textures folder where we imported the height map and click on import. And now what we'll do is we'll import these other two textures, the T angle out and the T flow out here, and click on open. And now we've got those two textures in there ready to use. So let's start with the flow one here. What I'm going to do is show you a very simple technique to apply that to a paint layer. So we'll use our road layer. I know the road texture is probably not the best thing for this, but it will give you the idea of what you can do with it. So what we need to do is go back into our landscape mode. And what we can do is we can go back to the Manage tab at the top, Import. And what you'll see here is that you have got this opportunity to import not only the height map that we did before, but also import for all the different layers as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our road layer to paint the flow map onto. So I can select that, then select the file that we've got. We didn't actually need to import it in because it's doing this externally, but we did need to do it for this one because we're going to use it as a mask. So now we'll select that T flow out again. And then once you've got it in here, just click on import. And you'll see if we go, let's go around to where there's a good bit of flow to see. We might need to make it a bit darker. Yeah, you can see here that where that flow comes down, it is now put the road texture in there. If we want to see it a bit more clearly, let's darken that texture. So go back to your material instance here, and down near the bottom we've got our road textures and tints here. Click on the road color tint and make that darker, and there you can see that that has made that much more visible where those flows are coming down. So any mask that you create in Gaea or another terrain creation tool, you can just apply directly to the paint layers and then adjust those textures to blend in the best way. So that's one way of using masks. Let's now look at how you can use other things like the angle mask within the auto material. Okay, so I'll come out of landscape mode and I want to show you how we can use that angle mask to apply, say, grass on one side of the landscape. So let's open up the content browser, go to your materials textures where we imported these textures, and let's rename this T angle out. Let's call it T grass mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that within the auto material to drive the creation of grass and also the creation of a grass mask that we can use in PCG to generate our grass. Now be aware that we're changing the auto material. This is sort of a bespoke example. So you may not want this to happen every time. So let's put it in there, and you can then take it out later if you want to change your auto landscape back to a generic material. So open up your master material, and what we'll do is we'll first create the mask using that texture. So go to the start of your material where you created all the masks, and what we will do is do a texture sample. So we will use shared wrap, then select your grass mask in here. So make sure it's selected here, and then plug it in here. We'll need to set up our UVs. We want this to be across the whole landscape here. So what we'll need to do is take the landscape coordinates, divide that by the size of the landscape, which in this case is 1009, and then plug that into the UVs, and then that is now our mask. So let's do a reroute node here. So add a named reroute node, and we'll call that grass mask. And let's just comment this and say bespoke grass mask on one side of the landscape. And then what we'll do is we'll, just before the output, we'll use that mask to blend in the grass layer. So let's zoom out and zoom in to here, where we've done our layer blend of all the materials. So let's just move the RVT and output over a little bit more. And now what we want to do is we want to do a blend. So a blend of material attributes. We'll move this output with control, move that output to here. And there what we want to do is take our output as it is at the moment, and then the attribute we want to blend with, or the material layer, is the mid-low layer where our grass is. So use our mid-low material, plug that into the B socket, and then our mask is the grass mask that we've just created. So that should keep everything as it is except for where we want the grass on one side, and we'll overlay that mid-low material. So click on apply, and once that's saved and applied, you can see that we now have grass just on one layer. And everything's a bit light at the moment, so you might want to change the exposure. We can do that quickly by adding in a post-process volume. So go to volumes, add volumes, post-process volume, drag it into the landscape, and then search for infinite extent unbound, and then finally change the exposure to manual exposure and something from 10 or 11, something like that. Okay, so now we've got a less bright landscape there. Okay, so we've now got the grass just on one side of the landscape, but now I want to actually have grass growing just on that layer as well. So this is pretty straightforward. All we need to do is go back to our master material and go down to the section where we set up the grass outputs. And if we're using the traditional landscape grass types, we need to plug it into the mid-low layer for landscape grass. If we're using PCG, we need to do the mid-low layer of physical materials. So let's do that. So just right click, grass mask, and let's put that into mid-low. So this is now our new way of setting the grass area for PCG. And remember, if you don't want this to be permanent, you need to come back here and take this out afterwards to go back to your generic landscape, or you could have taken a copy of this M Auto Landscape specifically for this level. I'm just keeping it simple for today. So click Save there. Nothing will change in the level because we haven't actually made use of this physical material output yet. So the last thing we need to do is we need to set up a PCG volume to make use of that output. Again, pretty straightforward. Go to the Add to the Project, find within your volumes, find PCG volume down near the bottom and drag that into the landscape. And then with your PCG volume selected in the outliner, go down until you find the PCG component. And in the graph, we will assign, so search for PCG, and you're looking for, search for landscape. I think that's what we called it. Yeah, we're looking for PCG landscape. Do generate. And you can see they're starting to appear in the foreground. There's a bit of a culling distance here, so let's come out here, go a bit lower. And you can see there is my grass growing just in the grass mask area. So they're not blended in because we haven't set up runtime virtual textures, but we've done that a few times before, so you can now add your runtime virtual texture in here to get your blended grass as well. So I think that's where we're going to end it today. Really what I wanted to show you here was just the approach to using those terrain, height and texture masks, different ways you could use them. So we used the height to create the landscape and also to draw on features to the landscape. Then we used the flow map. There are other ones in Gaea and other tools, other types of maps that you can export and then write directly onto your paint layers. Or you can integrate them within the master material like we did this with this grass mask to just have the textures and the associated foliage just in particular areas of your terrain. So I hope you found it useful today. Stay subscribed for a few more videos in this series, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.